I smoothed my blouse and took a deep breath before stepping into the conference room. The promotion I'd been working towards for years was finally within reach, but the butterflies in my stomach reminded me of everything I stood to lose. "Francesca, come in," my boss Richard called out. "We've been waiting for you." I plastered on a smile and strode to the empty chair at the head of the table. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare." Richard waved off my apology. "No worries. We're just excited to share the news." He beamed at me, and I felt a surge of hope. "Congratulations, Fran. You're our new regional sales director." The room erupted in applause, but I could barely hear it over the pounding of my heart. I'd done it. After years of long hours and missed family dinners, I'd finally reached the top. "Thank you," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm honored and thrilled to take on this new role." As my colleagues offered their congratulations, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it, focusing on shaking hands and accepting praise. It wasn't until an hour later, when I finally escaped to my office, that I checked the missed calls. 5 from Neil, 3 from the kids' school. My stomach dropped as I dialed Neil's number. He picked up on the first ring. "Where have you been?" he demanded, his voice tight with anger. "I've been trying to reach you for hours." "I was in a meeting," I said, guilt washing over me. "What's wrong? Are the kids okay?" Neil sighed heavily. "Tommy's sick. The school called, but they couldn't reach you, so I had to leave work early to pick him up." I closed my eyes, fighting back tears. "I'm so sorry, Neil. I should have checked my phone." "Yeah, you should have," he snapped. "This isn't the first time, Fran. I can't keep dropping everything because you're too busy with work." His words stung, but I knew he was right. "I'll make it up to you," I promised. "I'm leaving now. I'll be home in 20 minutes. "Don't bother," Neil said coldly. "I've got it under control. Just come home when you're done with whatever's more important than your family." The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in shock. Neil had never spoken to me like that before. We'd had our disagreements, sure, but this felt different, dangerous. I grabbed my purse and rushed out of the office, my promotion celebration forgotten. As I navigated through rush-hour traffic, my mind raced. How had things gotten so bad without me noticing? When was the last time Neil and I had a real conversation that didn't revolve around schedules or the kids? By the time I pulled into our driveway, my hands were shaking. I took a moment to compose myself before heading inside. The house was quiet when I entered, save for the low murmur of the TV in the living room. I found Neil sprawled on the couch, a beer in hand. "Where are the kids?" I asked, setting down my purse. "Asleep," Neil replied, not looking at me. "Tommy's fever broke an hour ago." I perched on the edge of the armchair, studying my husband's profile. "Neil, I'm sorry. I should have been there." He turned to face me then, his eyes hard. "You're always sorry, Fran, but nothing ever changes." "That's not fair," I protested. "I work hard to provide for this family." Neil laughed bitterly. "And what good is that if you're never here? The kids barely know you anymore." His words hit me like a physical blow. "That's not true," I whispered, but even as I said it, I wondered if he was right. Neil stood up abruptly. "I'm going to bed. We can talk about this in the morning." As he walked away, leaving me alone in the darkened living room, I realized that my perfect day had turned into a nightmare, and something told me this was just the beginning. The next morning, I woke to an empty bed and the sound of Neil rummaging in the kitchen. I steeled myself for the conversation ahead and made my way downstairs. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Neil grunted in response, not looking up from his coffee. "Neil, we need to talk about last night." He sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "What's there to talk about, Fran? You made your choice?" "My choice?" I felt my temper rising. "I didn't choose between my job and my family. I'm trying to do both." Neil slammed his mug down, coffee sloshing onto the counter. "Well, you're failing at one of them. Do you even know what's going on in your kids' lives anymore?" His words stung, but I refused to back down. "Of course I do. Just because I'm not here every minute doesn't mean I'm not involved." "Oh, really?" Neil's voice dripped with sarcasm. "What's Tommy's favorite subject in school right now? When was Lily's last dance recital?" I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. The truth was, I didn't know. Neil nodded, a bitter smile on his face. "That's what I thought." "That's not fair," I protested. "I'm working hard to give them a better life." They don't need a better life, Fran. They need their mother. We glared at each other across the kitchen island, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. I can't do this anymore, Neil said finally, his voice quieter but no less angry. I'm tired of being a single parent in a two-parent household. My heart clenched. What are you saying? Before he could answer, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Richard. Don't you dare answer that, Neil warned. I hesitated, torn between my responsibilities at work and the crisis unfolding in my kitchen. If you take that call, Fran, we're done. I mean it. With shaking hands, I declined the call. There. Are you happy now? Neil laughed humorlessly. No, Fran, I'm not happy. I haven't been happy for a long time. The front door opened, and our children's voices filled the house. Neil and I quickly composed ourselves as Tommy and Lily burst into the kitchen. Mom, you're home, Lily exclaimed, throwing her arms around me. I hugged her tightly, fighting back tears. I am, sweetie. I missed you. As I helped the kids with breakfast, I couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in my marriage. Neil barely spoke, his eyes distant as he mechanically went through the motions of the morning routine. Later that day, I was in my home office when I overheard Neil on the phone in the hallway. I don't know, Sarah. Things are really tense right now, he was saying, his voice low. No, I haven't told her about, it's not the right time. My blood ran cold. Who was Sarah, and what hadn't Neil told me? I waited until he hung up before confronting him. Who's Sarah? Neil's face paled. She's just a coworker. We've been working on a project together. And what haven't you told me? I pressed, my heart pounding. Neil ran a hand through his hair, looking everywhere but at me. It's nothing, Fran, just work stuff. But I could see the guilt in his eyes, the way he fidgeted with his wedding ring. In that moment, I knew our marriage was in far more trouble than I'd realized. Neil, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, are you having an affair? The silence that followed was deafening. Neil opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. But before he could answer, my phone rang once more. This time, it was the kids' school. As I answered the call, my eyes locked with Neil's. The look on his face told me everything I needed to know, and I felt my world crumbling around me. The hotel room felt cold and impersonal as I stared at my laptop, trying to focus on the presentation I'd be giving tomorrow. But my mind kept drifting back home, to Neil and the kids. It had been 3 days since I'd left for this business trip, and the tension from our last argument still lingered in the air. My phone buzzed, and I felt a mixture of relief and anxiety when I saw it was Tommy calling. Hey, sweetie, I answered, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. How are you? Hi, Mom, Tommy said, his voice small and uncertain. When are you coming home? My heart clenched. In 2 days, honey. Is everything okay? There was a pause, and I could hear Lily's voice in the background. Yeah, I guess, Tommy finally replied. It's just, Dad's been acting weird. I sat up straighter, my mom instincts on high alert. Weird how? He's not home much, Lily chimed in, having apparently grabbed the phone from her brother. And when he is, he's always on his phone or leaving to run errands. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Have you two been alone a lot? Mrs. Johnson from next door has been checking on us, Tommy said. But yeah, kinda. I closed my eyes, fighting back a wave of anger and fear. Okay, listen to me, I said, keeping my voice calm. I want you both to go to Mrs. Johnson's house right now. Tell her I called and asked her to keep you there until I can reach your father. Can you do that for me? After getting their agreement and making sure they were safely with our neighbor, I dialed Neil's number. It went straight to voicemail. Neil, I said, my voice shaking with barely contained fury. Call me back immediately. We need to talk about why our children are home alone while you're out God knows where. I paced the hotel room, my mind racing. Was Neil with Sarah? Had he abandoned our family for her? The thought made me sick. An hour passed with no word from Neil. I called Mrs. Johnson, who confirmed the kids were safe with her. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I called Neil's office. Hello, this is Francesca, Neil's wife, I said when his assistant answered. I'm trying to reach him about an urgent family matter. Is he there? I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, but Neil called in sick today, the assistant replied, sounding confused. He said he had a bad case of the flu. The lie hit me like a physical blow. I see, I managed to say. Thank you. I hung up and sank onto the bed, my whole body trembling. Neil wasn't sick, he wasn't working late. He was… What? Running around with Sarah while our children sat at home alone? My phone buzzed again. A text from Neil. Sorry, was in a meeting. Kids are fine, don't worry. The casual dismissal of my concerns pushed me over the edge. I dialed his number again, and this time he picked up. Neil, where the hell are you? I demanded without preamble. Fran, calm down, he said, his voice maddeningly calm. I told you, everything's fine. Everything is not fine, I shouted. Our children are alone. You lied to your work about being sick, and you're off doing God knows what with God knows who. There was a long pause. When Neil spoke again, his voice was cold. You're one to talk about abandoning our family, Fran. How many nights have you been away this month? That's different, and you know it, I hissed. I'm working, Neil. What's your excuse? Another pause. Then, maybe I needed a break too, Fran. Maybe I'm tired of being the one who's always there while you get to escape. His words hit me like a slap. Is that what this is? Punishment? Or is it just an excuse to be with Sarah? I heard Neil's sharp intake of breath. How do you know about Sarah? So it's true, I whispered, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. You're having an affair. Fran, it's not. It's complicated, Neil stammered. But I'd heard enough. I'm coming home, I said, my voice eerily calm. And when I get there, Neil, you'd better be prepared to explain yourself to me and our children. Because this ends now. I hung up and immediately started packing my bags. As I booked the first flight home, I felt a strange mix of rage, heartbreak, and determination. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The conference room erupted in applause as I concluded my presentation. Smiles and nods of approval surrounded me, but the victory felt hollow. My mind was back home with Tommy and Lily, wondering if Neil had kept his word about being there for them. Exceptional work, Francesca, my boss, Richard, beamed. You've exceeded all expectations in your new role. I forced a smile. Thank you, Richard. I'm glad it's been well received. As my colleagues filed out, Richard held me back. Fran, I know this promotion has been challenging, but you're thriving. We're considering you for an even more senior position. My heart raced, but not from excitement. That's wonderful, Richard. Can I have some time to think about it? He looked surprised but nodded. Of course. Take the weekend. We'll discuss it on Monday. Back in my hotel room, I stared at my phone, my finger hovering over Neil's number. We hadn't spoken since our heated exchange 3 days ago. Taking a deep breath, I dialed. Fran, Neil's voice was guarded. Is everything okay? I don't know, I admitted. How are the kids? They're fine. We had pizza night yesterday. Lily got an A on her science project. The casual normalcy of his words stung. I'd missed so much. Neil, we need to talk. About us, about Sarah, about everything. Silence stretched between us. Finally, Neil sighed. I know, but not over the phone. When are you coming home? Tomorrow, I said. I'm cutting the trip short. Fran, you can't keep doing that. Your job. My job isn't more important than our family, I interrupted, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. Another pause. Okay, Neil said softly. We'll talk tomorrow. After hanging up, I sat on the bed, overwhelmed by the weight of everything. My career was soaring, but at what cost? I thought of all the moments I'd missed. Lily's dance recitals, Tommy's baseball games, family dinners that had become increasingly rare. A knock at the door startled me. It was Jenna, a colleague I'd grown close to over the past few months. Hey, superstar, she grinned. We're all heading out for drinks to celebrate. You coming? I hesitated, torn between professional obligations and personal needs. I can't, Jenna. I need to pack. I'm heading home early. Jenna's smile faded. Fran, is everything okay? You've seemed distracted all week. Before I could stop myself, everything came pouring out. The fights with Neil, my suspicions about Sarah, the guilt over neglecting my children. Jenna listened, her face a mix of sympathy and concern. Oh, Fran, she said when I finished. I had no idea, but listen, you can't blame yourself for everything. You're an amazing mom and a brilliant professional. It's not your fault if Neil can't handle your success. Her words, meant to comfort, hit me like a punch to the gut. Was that really how I came across? So focused on my career that I'd neglected everything else? Thanks, Jenna, I managed. But I think I've lost sight of what's truly important. After Jenna left, I sat at the desk and pulled out a notepad. On one side, I wrote career. On the other, family. As I began listing pros and cons, tears blurred my vision. My phone buzzed, a text from Tommy. "Miss you, Mom. Can't wait till you're home." In that moment, clarity washed over me. I knew what I had to do. I picked up my phone and dialed Richard's number. "Richard, it's Francesca. I've made a decision about that senior position." As I spoke, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. For the first time in months, I was certain I was making the right choice. Whatever happened with Neil, whatever challenges lay ahead, I knew where my priorities needed to be. Tomorrow, I'd go home and face the music. But tonight, I'd sleep easier knowing I was finally putting my family first. The taxi pulled up to our house, and I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. I'd spent the entire flight rehearsing what I'd say to Neil, how we'd work through this rough patch. But as I approached the front door, an eerie silence enveloped me. "Neil? Tommy? Lily?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. No response. Panic rising, I rushed from room to room, finding nothing but unmade beds and half-empty closets. In the kitchen, a yellow sticky note on the fridge caught my eye. Neil's hasty scrawl read, "Kids are at Mrs. Johnson's. We need to talk. I'll call you." My hands shook as I dialed Mrs. Johnson's number. "Francesca, dear," she answered. "The children are fine. Neil dropped them off yesterday, said there was a family emergency." "Yesterday," I choked out. "How long were you supposed to keep them?" A pause. "Well, Neil wasn't specific. Is everything all right?" I mumbled some excuse and hung up, my mind reeling. Neil had left our children with a neighbor indefinitely? What kind of family emergency could possibly justify this? As if on cue, my phone buzzed with a text from Neil. "I'm sorry. I couldn't do it anymore. I'm with Sarah. We'll figure out arrangements for the kids later." The world tilted on its axis. I stumbled to the couch, reading and rereading the message, unable to process the casual cruelty of his words. A knock at the door jolted me back to reality. It was Tommy and Lily, faces bright with excitement at seeing me home early. "Mom," Lily cried, throwing herself into my arms. "We missed you so much." Tommy, ever the observant one, furrowed his brow. "Where's Dad?" "Mrs. Johnson said he had to go away for a while." I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Your father, he had to take care of something. Squawk, but don't worry. I'm here now." As I helped them unpack, my mind raced. How could I tell them their father had abandoned us? How could I protect them from the pain I was feeling? That night, after tucking the kids in, I sat at the kitchen table staring at Neil's note. Anger, betrayal, and fear warred within me. I thought about calling him, demanding explanations, but what good would that do? Instead, I pulled out my laptop and started researching. Divorce lawyers, child custody laws, financial advisors. With each click, my resolve strengthened. Neil might have walked out on us, but I wouldn't let him destroy our family. As dawn broke, I had a plan. I'd fight for full custody, ensure financial stability for the kids, and rebuild our lives, with or without Neil. My phone buzzed again. "Neil, can we talk? I want to explain." I stared at the message, my finger hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to lash out, to hurt him as deeply as he'd hurt me, but a cooler, more determined part knew that engaging now would only complicate things. Instead, I typed, "All communication goes through my lawyer from now on. Expect to hear from them soon." As I hit send, I felt a strange mix of sadness and empowerment. The life I'd known was over, shattered by Neil's betrayal, but from the ashes, a stronger, more resilient Francesca was emerging. I heard stirring upstairs. The kids would be awake soon. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Neil might have given up on our family, but I never would. As I started preparing breakfast, my mind clear and focused for the first time in months, I made a silent vow, to my children, to myself, and to the future we'd build together. We would not just survive this, we would thrive. The coffee maker beeped, and I poured myself a cup, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. Outside, the sun was rising, painting the sky in hues of hope. It was a new day, the first day of our new life, and I was ready for it. The shrill ring of my phone pierced the quiet morning. Neil's name flashed on the screen, and my heart raced. It had been a week since he'd left, a week of sleepless nights and tear-filled days. With trembling fingers, I answered. "Fran." Neil's voice was unnervingly calm. "We need to talk about the kids." I gripped the phone tighter. "Now you want to talk? After abandoning them without a word?" "I didn't abandon them," he snapped. "I left them with Mrs. Johnson. I knew you'd be home soon." That's not the point, Neil. My voice rose, and I glanced nervously at the stairs, hoping the kids wouldn't wake. You left our children with a neighbor indefinitely. Do you have any idea what that's done to them, to me? A heavy sigh crackled through the line. I'm sorry, Fran. I didn't mean for things to happen this way, but Sarah and I... Don't. I cut him off, bile rising in my throat. Don't you dare talk about her to me. She's part of my life now, Fran. You're going to have to accept that. The casual way he said it, as if he were discussing a new job or a haircut, made something snap inside me. Accept it? You want me to accept that you've thrown away our family for some fling? It's not a fling. Neil's voice hardened. I love her, Fran. I've never felt this way before. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled to the kitchen counter, gripping it for support. What about our children, Neil? What about the vows we made? The kids will adjust, he said, maddeningly reasonable. And vows, sometimes people change, Fran. You changed when you got that promotion. You were never home, always working. What did you expect? Hot tears spilled down my cheeks. So this is my fault? Because I dared to have a career? No, it's not. Look, I didn't call to argue. I want to see the kids this weekend. I'll pick them up Friday after school. Absolutely not, I hissed. You don't get to waltz in and out of their lives like nothing happened. They're my children too, Fran. You can't keep them from me. Watch me, I spat, then hung up. My hands shook as I set the phone down. The unfairness of it all threatened to overwhelm me. Neil had betrayed us, left us, and now he wanted to play happy families on the weekends? I heard movement upstairs. The kids were awake. Wiping my eyes, I tried to compose myself, but as I reached for the cereal bowls, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The room spun, and I found myself on the kitchen floor, gasping for air. Mom? Tommy's worried voice came from the doorway. Mom, are you okay? I looked up to see both my children staring at me, fear etched on their young faces. In that moment, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I couldn't be both mother and father, couldn't shield them from the pain while dealing with my own. I'm okay, sweetie, I managed, pulling myself up. Just a little tired. But as I hugged them close, I knew I was far from okay. The weight of everything, Neil's betrayal, the impending custody battle, the uncertain future, crashed down on me. I needed help. I needed support. Most of all, I needed to be strong for Tommy and Lily. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone again. This time, I dialed my parents' number. Mom? My voice cracked. I need you. Can you come? As I explained the situation through tears, I felt a tiny spark of hope. I wasn't alone in this fight. And Neil would learn that he couldn't just walk away from his responsibilities without consequences. The kids clung to me, their small arms a reminder of what I was fighting for. Whatever came next, I would face it head on, for them, for our family, for the life we deserved. The doorbell rang, and I steeled myself for what was to come. Opening the door, I found Neil's parents, Martha and George, their faces etched with concern and confusion. Francesca, dear, Martha began, her voice trembling. What's going on? Neil's not answering our calls, and when we stopped by your house, the neighbors said... I ushered them inside, my heart heavy. You'd better sit down, I said, leading them to the living room where my own parents were already waiting. As I recounted Neil's betrayal and abandonment, Martha's face crumpled, while George's reddened with anger. My mother reached out, squeezing my hand in silent support. I can't believe it, George muttered, shaking his head. Our son, how could he do this to you? To the children? Martha dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. We raised him better than this, Francesca. I'm so sorry. Their genuine shock and remorse hit me harder than I expected. I'd been bracing for denial, for them to take Neil's side. Instead, their support washed over me like a balm. We'll talk to him, George said firmly. Make him see reason. I shook my head. I appreciate that, but I don't think it'll help. Neil's made his choice. Just then my phone buzzed. A text from Neil. I'm coming to get the kids. Be there in 10. Panic surged through me. He's on his way, I choked out. He wants to take the children. My father stood up, his face set. He's not taking those kids anywhere. The next 10 minutes were a blur of activity. My parents ushered Tommy and Lily upstairs, while Neil's parents positioned themselves near the front door, ready to intercept their son. When Neil's car pulled up, I felt like I might be sick. But as he approached the house, a strange calm settled over me. This was it, the moment I'd been dreading and preparing for. Neil's face registered shock when he saw his parents. Mom? Dad? What are you doing here? We could ask you the same thing, son. George's voice was cold. What do you think you're doing? Neil's eyes darted to me. I'm here to see my children. Fran can't keep them from me. You left them, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. You abandoned our family for another woman. You don't get to waltz back in like nothing happened. I didn't abandon them, Neil shouted. I left them with a neighbor. I knew you'd be back soon. Martha stepped forward, her eyes brimming with tears. Neil, how could you? Those children need their father. They'll still have me, Neil insisted. Sarah and I, we can provide a loving home. Sarah? George's voice thundered. You're throwing away your family for some homewrecker? Neil's face hardened. Don't talk about her like that. She understands me in a way Fran never did. The words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let him see how much they hurt. Understanding doesn't excuse betrayal, Neil. You made vows. You have responsibilities. Vows? Neil laughed bitterly. What about your vows, Fran? You were never here, always working, always putting your career first. That's not fair, my mother interjected. Francesca has been an amazing mother and wife. Neil's eyes flashed. Stay out of this. It's between me and Fran. No, I said firmly. It's not just between us anymore. You involved our children the moment you walked out that door. I could see Neil's resolve wavering as he looked from face to face, realizing he was outnumbered. But then his expression hardened again. Fine, he spat. Have it your way. But this isn't over, Fran. I'll see you in court. As Neil stormed back to his car, I felt my knees buckle. My parents rushed to support me, while Martha and George looked on, their faces a mix of shame and sorrow. I'm so sorry, Martha whispered. We'll do whatever we can to help. George nodded firmly. We're here for you and the kids, Francesca. Whatever you need. As the reality of what just happened sank in, I realized this was just the beginning. The real battle, for custody, for financial support, for our children's future, was still to come. But looking at the supportive faces around me, I knew I wasn't in this fight alone. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders. Thank you, I said. I'm going to need all the help I can get. 6 months had passed since Neil walked out, and our lives had settled into a new rhythm. My parents had moved into a nearby apartment, becoming a constant source of support and love for the kids. Neil's parents, true to their word, had been equally supportive, often stepping in to help with childcare and emotional support. As I sat in the courtroom, waiting for our final custody hearing to begin, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and determination. Neil sat across the aisle looking uncomfortable in his suit. Sarah, his new friend, was noticeably absent. Our lawyer, a formidable woman named Diane, leaned over. Remember, Francesca, stay calm. We have a strong case. I nodded, my eyes fixed on the judge as she entered the courtroom. This was it, the moment that would define our future. As the proceedings began, I listened with growing disbelief as Neil's lawyer painted a picture of me as a career-obsessed mother who had neglected her family. They brought up my long hours, my business trips, even my recent promotion. When it was our turn, Diane stood, her voice clear and confident. Your Honor, my client has been nothing but a devoted mother. Her career success doesn't diminish her parenting, it enhances it. She provides stability, financial security, and a strong role model for her children. She then presented evidence of Neil's abandonment, his sporadic visits, and his failure to provide consistent child support. As she spoke, I saw Neil's face grow increasingly pale. The judge listened intently, her expression unreadable. When both sides had presented their cases, she called a brief recess to consider her decision. Those 15 minutes felt like an eternity. I closed my eyes, thinking of Tommy and Lily, of all we'd been through. Whatever happened, I knew I'd never stop fighting for them. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. After careful consideration, she began, I've reached a decision. Primary custody will be awarded to Francesca Carter, with Neil Carter granted visitation rights every other weekend and shared holidays. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. I barely heard the rest of the judge's words as she outlined the child support arrangements and other details. As we left the courtroom, Neil approached me, his face a mix of emotions. Fran, I'm sorry for everything. I looked at him, this man I'd once loved, now a stranger. I'm not the one you need to apologize to, Neil. It's our children who've suffered the most. He nodded, looking genuinely remorseful for the first time. I know, I want to make things right with them. Can we work something out? Beyond what the court ordered? I considered his words carefully. For the kids' sake, I'm willing to try. But you need to prove yourself, Neil. They need consistency, not just promises. As Neil walked away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. We had a long road ahead, but for the first time in months, I felt hope for our future. Outside the courthouse, my parents and Neil's were waiting. Their faces lit up when they saw my expression. We won, I said simply, and was engulfed in a group hug. As we drove home, my mother squeezed my hand. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. You've shown such strength through all of this. I smiled, thinking of the journey we'd been on. I couldn't have done it without all of you. Walking into our house, my house now, I was greeted by the excited shouts of Tommy and Lily. As I hugged them close, I realized that this was the true victory. Not the court decision, but the love and resilience of our little family. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Lily looked up at me with serious eyes. Mom, are we going to be okay? I kissed her forehead, my heart full. Yes, sweetheart. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be wonderful. As I closed their bedroom door, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but we'd face it together. Neil's betrayal had shaken our world, but it hadn't broken us. Instead, it had revealed a strength I never knew I had. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, surrounded by the love of my family, I knew we could handle anything life threw our way. We weren't just survivors, we were thrivers, and our story was far from over. The crumpled eviction notice slipped from my fingers, fluttering softly to the polished wood floors. I stared at the offensive piece of paper, bile rising in my throat as I absorbed the callous words. Your continued occupation of the premises is no longer welcomed. Vacate within 30 days or legal action will be pursued. No name, no explanation, just a cold command typed out on my mother-in-law's letterhead. After 12 years of living in this house, I was being kicked to the curb like yesterday's trash. I shook my head sharply, as if trying to wake myself from this nightmare. But the stark black words on the page remained unchanged. Marlene did this. It had to be her. Ever since I married her precious son Theo 5 years ago, she had made her disdain for me abundantly clear. In her esteemed opinion, I was too common, too plain, and too barren to be a fitting wife. My fingers curled into fists as hot anger flooded my chest. This went beyond petty grievances with the overbearing matriarch. No, Theo had to be complicit in this scheme to cast me out of my own home. The man I loved and trusted had betrayed me in the worst possible way. Bile continued to rise in my throat as my mind raced over the past few months. The growing distance between Theo and I, the lengthening work hours, the mysterious phone calls he would abruptly end whenever I entered the room. Like puzzle pieces clicking into place, it all started to make horrible sense. I sank down onto the cold marble floors, the eviction notice still glaring relentlessly from where it had landed. Hugo, my tabby cat, nudged his head against my elbow, disturbed by the dark storm clouds gathering around me. I stroked his back reflexively, drawing comfort from his warm, rumbling purr. At least I still had Hugo on my side. That was more than I could say for my traitorous husband and his insidious mother. As I sat there, the 12 years I had spent in this house washed over me like a tide. Theo presenting me with the key the day after our honeymoon, beaming with pride to make me mistress of this magnificent estate. Long summer days lounging by the pool with my friends, glasses of crisp rosé in hand. Curled up with Theo by the crackling fire on winter nights, safe in the circle of his strong arms, I swallowed hard past the lump in my throat. Were all those memories just pretty illusions? Had my marriage to Theo been nothing but an elaborate sham this entire time? The painted walls around me now seemed like a gilded cage, trapping me inside a role I no longer played. Mistress of the manor, lady of the house. Those titles had been ripped away, replaced now with unwelcome occupant. Everything I had known, this house, my marriage, my hopes of starting a family one day, had been built on quicksand. And now I was sinking into an abyss of anger, betrayal, and bone-deep hurt. I rose on wobbly legs, shaking off Hugo's concerned nudges. Padding quietly through the empty halls, I entered my bedroom with trepidation. Theo's smells still lingered. his musky cologne, the peppermint hair gel he used religiously each morning. But for the first time, those familiar scents made my stomach curdle with resentment instead of affection. I sank down on the massive four-poster bed, its plush duvet suddenly feeling frivolous and wasteful. I should have known a marriage crafted from convenience instead of passion could never withstand the tests of time. Theo had needed a polite, presentable wife to silence his mother's complaints. I had needed financial security after my first failed marriage left me penniless. On paper, we made perfect sense. But the contracts of marriage run deeper than what's on paper. They require trust, communication, compromise, all things painfully absent from my relationship with Theo. I rose and began yanking open dresser drawers, no longer caring about the racket I was making. Let them hear what damage their callous actions had wrought. I recklessly swept aside neat stacks of ironed clothing, not even folding them properly in my haste. My hands closed around the fake bottom I had installed in his drawer years ago. Popping it open, I retrieved the flash drive concealed beneath, clutching it tightly. If Theo thought he could discard me so easily, he was sorely mistaken. I was taking this insurance policy with me. I woke with a start, momentarily confused by my unfamiliar surroundings. Rather than the king-size sleigh bed I'd shared with Theo, I was curled up on the lumpy sofa bed in my tiny rental apartment. The previous day came crashing back, the confrontation with Theo over my eviction, my furious packing, his half-hearted excuses about financial difficulties. I had spat back that money seemed plentiful enough for him to afford a fancy new condo for his mistress. Theo's face had drained of color. Who told you that? He sputtered. I found out all on my own, I hissed. I know you've been siphoning money from our accounts for months. Did you really think I wouldn't notice $10,000 a month disappearing? He raked a hand through his hair, refusing to meet my livid gaze. Alara, I swear, she didn't mean anything to me. It was just a stupid fling. Save it, I snapped, clenching my fist so I wouldn't succumb to my urge to slap him. This isn't about her. This is about you lying to my face, betraying our vows, and deceiving me. I turned on my heel, abandoning him to deal with the movers. My departure was satisfyingly dramatic, but my triumph soon faded, replaced by bone-deep hurt and anger. I rose unsteadily from the lumpy couch, my back protesting yesterday's frenzied activity. At least Theo's credit card had been useful for furnishing this depressingly bare apartment. I hoped the $5,000 bill gave him a nice slap in the face. I filled Hugo's food bowl on autopilot, my thoughts churning darkly. How could I have missed all the signs these past few months? Thinking back, it was painfully obvious. Theo's late nights at work, his constant distraction whenever we talked, the locked study I was now barred from entering. An icy sensation trickled down my spine. The locked study. In my hurried packing yesterday, I'd forgotten to retrieve my laptop stashed in there. Cursing under my breath, I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Time for another unwanted trip to the scene of this betrayal. Maybe I'd accidentally smashed something expensive on my way out. 20 minutes later, I stood outside the formidable wrought iron gates that marked the entrance to what used to be my home. I stared bitterly at the ostentatious double doors and sprawling columns. What a fool I'd been, thinking I belonged behind those gilded walls. Squaring my shoulders, I strode up the winding driveway, steeling myself for another confrontation. Before I could knock, the door was wrenched open abruptly. Marlene's piercing eyes raked over me disdainfully. Well, well, I thought I made myself clear about you not being welcome here anymore, she said coldly. Behind her tailored skirt and silk blouse, I caught a glimpse of suitcases stacked in the foyer. My eyes narrowed. Going somewhere, Marlene? That's none of your concern. State your business and then kindly leave. I crossed my arms. I need to get some personal items from the study. It will just take a moment. Over her shoulder, I noticed Theo descending the curved staircase, his normal polish slightly diminished. His suit was badly wrinkled and his face sallow and drawn, but my long-dormant sympathy remained buried deep. He had made his bed by betraying our marriage. Now he could lie in it. Let her get her things, Mother, he said tiredly, avoiding my accusatory stare. Might as well avoid another scene. Marlene huffed in annoyance but remained stubbornly blocking the doorway. Sighing, I shouldered past her roughly. Her affronted gasp followed me as I stormed down the hallway to the locked study. Fishing the key from my bag with trembling fingers, I shoved it in the lock vindictively. As expected, the study was in complete disarray. Papers scattered, drawers hanging open haphazardly, remnants of my missing belongings strewn across the floor. I spotted my laptop under a chair and quickly stashed it in my bag. As I turned to leave, I paused, struck by the chaotic sight. Something wasn't adding up. Marlene's packed suitcases, this ransacked room. It hinted at something much darker lurking beneath the surface. I slowly circled the room, taking in details that eluded me during my angry packing frenzy yesterday. Bank statements and unopened bills littered the floor alongside flashy jewelry store receipts. My investigator's instincts, dormant since my divorce attorney days, switched on. Methodically sorting through the paper trails, a shocking narrative emerged. Excessive spending well beyond our means, panicked credit card applications clearly denied, final foreclosure warnings from the bank. Rocking back on my heels, I struggled to absorb this new reality on top of yesterday's revelations. Not only had Theo betrayed our marriage, but his reckless spending had torpedoed us into financial ruin without my knowledge. No wonder Marlene was so desperate to cast me out of her perfect palace. Clutching the damning evidence to my chest, I strode out of the study with newfound purpose. Theo and Marlene had played me for a fool, manipulating me like their own personal puppet. But the show was over. This victim had found her voice, and there would be hell to pay. Armed with the damning evidence tucked securely in my bag, I strode towards the front door with righteous fury pumping through my veins. Theo and Marlene had treated me like a disposable pawn for too long. Now it was time for their despicable web of lies to come crashing down. Marlene blocked my way as I tried to storm past, her talon-like nails digging into my forearm. "Just where do you think you're going with those private documents?" she hissed. I wrenched my arm free, getting right in her pinched face. "First, don't ever touch me again. Second, your financial records stopped being private when you used my name to take out massive loans. I'm taking this evidence and contacting my divorce lawyer." Theo rushed over, his tired eyes wide with panic. "Alara, please, be reasonable. We're undergoing a temporary cash flow issue, that's all. Mother has already made arrangements to cover it." His platitudes only stoked my rage hotter. "Oh, so pilfering my personal accounts without consent and racking up secret credit card debt constitutes just a minor issue in your book?" I scoffed bitterly. "I saw the denied applications and final foreclosure notices, Theo. Your lies stop here." Theo paled while Marlene's painted lips flattened into a hard line, her beady eyes shooting daggers. I almost laughed at how the perfectly coiffed vulture resembled a ruffled hen with her feathers in a bunch. "You clearly don't grasp the gravity of this situation," Marlene bit out. "My son is facing financial ruin if word of this gets out. Is dragging our family name through the mud really necessary just to satisfy some petty revenge fantasy?" Red-hot anger licked through my veins. This woman dared insinuate I would invent financial crime just for revenge? Before I could retort, she charged on, clutching Theo close to her bony chest. "All my son did was try to maintain a lifestyle you eagerly enjoyed the fruits of for years. And how do you repay that generosity? By exposing his understandable missteps to bring us all down out of spite." Theo gently extricated himself from her claw-like grip. "Alara has a right to be upset, Mother," he said tiredly, still refusing to meet my eyes. "I should have been honest about our situation from the start." I crossed my arms, unswayed by his half-hearted display of accountability. "Well, it's too little, too late for that now. I'm contacting my lawyer this afternoon to file for divorce. And I won't hesitate to disclose evidence of fraud." Marlene's bony hand flew to her throat dramatically, while Theo slumped against the wall. For all their pretenses of power and control, one whiff of consequences had them quaking in their expensive Italian leather shoes. Pathetic. I stepped forward until only inches separated me from Marlene's wild eyes. "Here are your options. You can contest the divorce and force this evidence into public record, destroying what remains of your family name and fortune. Or you can sign the papers, providing me a reasonable settlement, and pray I show mercy by staying silent." I strode away, heels clicking crisply on the polished floors. At the front door I paused without turning around. "You have 24 hours to decide. Choose wisely." The heavy oak door slammed behind me with an air of finality. I slid behind the wheel of my car, hands shaking as I cranked the engine. Now that my adrenaline was fading, the gravity of what just happened sank in. I had confronted my deceitful husband and manipulative mother-in-law head-on. And instead of playing the victim as they expected, I had seized control and dictated the terms going forward. No more cowering or shrinking myself to fit their twisted expectations. The doormat they had trampled on so gleefully was finally demanding respect. As I pulled through the imposing gates onto the quiet suburban street, I caught a glimpse of Hugo's plushy face peeking through the back windshield, my breath hitched in my throat. In the chaos of that toxic household, I had nearly forgotten about my sweet Tabby. An unfamiliar sensation pricked behind my eyelids. I swiped at them fiercely as I accelerated down the tree-lined road. How could I have left my loyal companion, my sole source of comfort during many lonely nights, alone with those monsters? What kind of guardian abandons her defenseless kitty like that? My hands clenched the wheel tightly. Enough second-guessing myself. There would be plenty of time for regret later. Right now, I needed to focus and stick to the plan. I would wrap up my affairs quickly and efficiently before setting us both free from this toxic situation. Soon, sweet Hugo and I would be far away, starting fresh in a place where no one knew our names. Just a woman and her cat against the world. Terrifying, yes. But anything seemed better than staying trapped in this twisted web of betrayal and lies. 2 weeks had passed since I stormed out of Theo and Marlene's den of lies. In that time, I had booked us 2 one-way tickets far away from this town and its superficial social scene, somewhere I could remake myself without judgmental eyes tracking my every move. The divorce was progressing rapidly now that Theo had acquiesced to my demands, perhaps hoping I would show mercy if he played nicely. But I harbored no misguided sympathy for the man who had deceived and used me for years. His pleas for another chance now rang hollow when I reflected on all the nights I had cried myself to sleep, wondering what I did wrong, why I couldn't get pregnant, no matter how hard we tried. At least I found grim satisfaction in witnessing his empire of lies crumble. Without my financial contributions and social connections, Theo's business deals rapidly dried up. Under scrutiny from investors about some accounting discrepancies, his scheming mother was booted from the board of directors, losing her seat of domineering power. She had always prioritized profits over ethics. Now, with their dirty laundry aired like musty old sheets, the Jennings name attracted only wary side eyes and hushed gossip instead of envy. Good riddance. Let the vultures circle and the wolves descend. They made this bed. Now they could lie in the ruins that remained. The day before my departure, I found myself reluctantly driving past the cul-de-sac that once led to such a grand house of lies. Grim satisfaction flooded me at the sight of the imposing wrought-iron gates now obstructed with somber eviction signs rather than luxurious gardens. But peering closer, I spotted an elderly woman lingering alone with her suitcase on the sidewalk, wildly dialing some number. As she turned, recognition slammed me in the gut. Marlene's once commanding presence had diminished into a frail, defeated shell of her former self. Her arrogance had crumpled alongside the financial empire she was so proud of. An uncomfortable twinge stirred in my chest before I quashed it down. I owed that woman nothing, least of all my pity or sympathy. Her own ruthless ambition had led her here. I intend to drive on, leaving Marlene surrounded by the ruins of everything her vile plots had built. But Hugo meowed loudly, gazing back with imploring eyes. Cursing myself for a soft-hearted fool, I pulled to the curb and lowered the passenger window. "Do you need some help?" I asked baldly, still unwilling to show warmth despite her circumstances. Marlene started at my voice before gathering herself hurriedly. "We had to vacate the premises so the bank could take inventory for auction," she said stiffly. I sighed. Even now, unable to ask for help outright. "Do you need a ride somewhere?" Her fingers fidgeted with her ostentatious wedding ring, the impressive diamonds now looking gaudy and excessive. "I was meant to stay with my cousin Gerald for the time being, but it appears his hospitality has expired." My mouth flattened into a thin line. Even her own family was fed up dealing with the fallout from her machinations. And Theo clearly wasn't around to handle his discarded mess of a mother. Another impatient meow decided me. Put your bag in the back next to Hugo. You can stay with me until you figure something else out. Surprise flickered across her tight features. That is quite an unexpected gesture after, well, everything. I shrugged, unwilling to rehash the past. I'm leaving town tomorrow anyway. Consider us temporary roommates. I left the implied time frame of 24 hours or less hanging between us. The drive to my tiny rental passed in silence until we pulled into the faded lot. Marlene took in the cracked paint and missing shingles with thinly veiled distaste. It has a certain rustic charm, she ventured half-heartedly before following me inside. I busied myself pouring food for Hugo, who had taken an immediate liking to our new houseguest. Meanwhile, Marlene lingered awkwardly before perching on the very edge of the couch. Our forced intimacy felt surreal after over a decade of cold disregard from both sides. As we picked at leftover takeout later on, polite strains of conversation gave way to candid reflections about the future, prompted perhaps by the bottle of wine I dug up. I discovered Marlene's dream of teaching music one day. In turn, I confessed my burning desire to move somewhere warm and sunny, far removed from the Illumina social fishbowl, to take up gardening. For a few strange hours, we were just two souls making sense of life's wreckage, minus the history of wounds and grudges between us. But the wine eventually dwindled along with our stilted camaraderie. As we turned in for the night, tomorrow's uncertainties settled back upon us like a leaden weight. I jolted awake the next morning, momentarily forgetting about my unexpected houseguest. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee drew me out to the cramped kitchenette. Marlene stood rigidly by the ancient stove, wisps of gray hair escaping her normally immaculate updo. I hope you don't mind me taking the liberty of preparing breakfast, she said uncertainly. I shrugged, accepting the proffered mug. Thanks. I'm not much of a cook anyway. As we ate yogurt and granola in awkward silence, I mulled over this surreal situation. Just yesterday, Marlene was an iconic socialite. Today she was humbled and adrift, taking refuge in my modest rental. Fate certainly loved poetic twists, the haughty queen dethroned and dependent on a princess she had scorned for years. I couldn't deny feeling a slight buzz of schadenfreude watching Marlene in yesterday's rumpled Chanel grimace at the dated avocado appliances. I cleared our dishes brusquely, anxious to escape this strange familiarity. Marlene lingered at the table, gnawing her lip. Have you given any thought to what comes next, after? Her unspoken words hung heavy between us. After she left here. After I moved away to start fresh. After the final guillotine blade of divorce severed me from the only life I'd known for 12 years. I scrubbed the plates harder, avoiding her piercing gaze as I pretended fascination with a bit of stuck egg. The truth was I actively resisted peering too far down the lonely road of singlehood stretching before me. Despite everything, searing pain gripped my heart, imagining never seeing Theo's crooked smile first thing in the morning, or hearing his off-key singing in the shower. Through betrayal and deception, parts of me still clung to the comforting refuge of us. Of course, I couldn't confess these weak sentiments to Marlene. Clearing my throat roughly, I turned to face her with forced conviction. I have a flight booked to Arizona for later today. Once there, I'll start job hunting so I can afford a small place just for me and Hugo. My voice hitched slightly over our names. Eventually, I might even try dating again, but for now, it's enough to just live simply without toxic people around. I expected Marlene to flinch at the thinly veiled barb. Instead, her eyes softened with what looked strangely like empathy. The future is often murkier than our best-laid plans anticipate, she said slowly. Perhaps if I had adopted your openness to unexpected possibilities years ago, things would have played out quite differently. I raised a skeptical eyebrow, certain this was a transparent attempt to diminish her culpability. But Marlene raised a staying hand. You owe me nothing, least of all an audience for my regrets. Suffice it to say that pride and fear of vulnerability blinded me to what truly mattered until it was too late. She glanced down, blinking rapidly, while I shifted awkwardly. I had steeled myself to confront Marlene's haughty indifference once more, only to be thrown by this display of humility. But I hesitantly filled the silence, voicing a question that had plagued me for years. Why did you dislike me so intensely from the beginning? I tried everything to win your approval and make Theo happy. My voice cracked pathetically on his name. So much for indifference. Marlene seemed to fold into herself, and for the first time I glimpsed hints of a heavy burden weighing down her ramrod posture. You represented warmth, spontaneity, sincerity, everything I lost touch with long ago in my quest for the perfect family image. She gazed out the dingy window. Rather than inspire me to reconnect with life's joys, your vibrancy only magnified my own isolation, so I sought to diminish what I envied. Her poignant confession landed between us with the weight of a thrown gauntlet, unexpected but impossible to ignore. I sank slowly onto a creaking chair, shoulders slumping, too exhausted to even summon anger over so many wasted years chained to her warped insecurities and judgments. Perhaps sensing my fatigue, Marlene lightly touched my shoulder. The past can't be altered, but the future awaits whatever we choose to carry forward or leave behind. With that enigmatic remark, she quietly retreated to the bathroom, granting me space to process this overdue revelation. Through the dingy window, I glimpsed my car stuffed with 2 lives haphazardly thrown together, aiming only for distance from the ruins of experience. Gathering courage, I whispered a promise, one life I could still get right. I zipped my bulging suitcase with finality, scanning the cramped room for any last-minute items. Today was an ending, the closing of a chapter filled with betrayal, heartbreak, and finally empowerment. Soon Marlene and I would part ways at the airport to embark on uncertain futures that no longer involved the toxic Jennifer men. Marlene perched elegantly on the sagging sofa, though her normal, perfectly pressed attire was rumpled after a night on the lumpy pullout. I hesitated, feeling I should say something, but uncertain where we stood after last night's emotional conversation. Before the awkward silence could stretch too long, my cell phone lit up with Theo's handsome face. Still conflicted over seeing his smile every day in my photos, I silenced the call. I owed him nothing more, especially on my last day in this godforsaken town. "Let me guess, another pathetic plea for reconciliation?" Marlene asked dryly. When I nodded tersely, her mouth flattened into a hard line. Clearly the consequences of his abhorrent behavior haven't fully penetrated that thick skull yet, if he believes sweet words can erase the past. I bristled slightly at her criticism. Theo cheating didn't negate over a decade together when I still sometimes slipped and thought of him as my partner rather than soon-to-be ex. Sensing my hesitation, Marlene leaned forward, eyes flashing. "Elara, listen to me. Men like Theodore never change. They simply find new victims once the current one finally resists being used and lied to. You deserve so much better, and I won't have you throwing away this fresh start because of some misplaced longing for a man incapable of valuing your beautiful spirit." Her passion threw me. Marlene despised vulnerability, preferring to manipulate scenarios from behind the scenes. This fierce display revealed glimpses of the motherly protector she kept buried beneath ambition and stone-faced control. Seeing warmth emanating from someone I had long dismissed as an icy villain both rattled and touched me. Rather than grapple with complex feelings, I straightened briskly and reached for my suitcase. "We should get going. I still need to drop you at the airport." The drive passed swiftly as we purposefully avoided tender topics or future plans. But pulling up to the terminal's bustling curb, melancholy still permeated the cramped space. Our paths were unlikely to ever cross again after today. Nostalgia flickered briefly for the friends we could have been under different circumstances before I quashed it down. No point getting mired in fruitless what-ifs. I climbed out and retrieved her small bag from the back seat. Facing each other squarely for likely the last time, echoes of the past hovered ghostly between us. Years of rivalry and resentment now faded into exhaustion and regret in the light of present upheaval. Surprising us both, I stepped forward and briefly hugged Marlene's fragile frame, feeling sharp shoulder blades under my palms. She squeezed back tightly for a breath before drawing up sternly, lips quivering slightly. With a mute nod that conveyed volumes, she walked briskly through the sliding doors without a backward glance. Watching her departure, I exhaled slowly, unexpectedly feeling lighter and oddly at peace. The bitter old vulture had faced her long-overdue reckoning, but the broken woman moving cautiously into an uncertain future now seemed unshackled from former bonds of perfectionism. I lingered a few moments more in the idling car, staring sightlessly across the bustling lanes of traffic. Then Hugo meowed insistently from his carrier, jolting me from troubled thoughts. Our new life awaited far from this place of ghosts and shadows. After dropping Hugo at the special pet boarding area with strict personalized care instructions, I headed toward the crowded security queues. But barely 20 steps later, familiar polished loafers appeared in my peripheral vision. I halted abruptly, heart pounding. How dare he ambush me here when I had made my wishes for no contact perfectly clear? I pivoted slowly to face Theo, taking savage satisfaction as his innately poised countenance wavered under my blistering glare. The weeks following my departure had clearly taken their toll. His Armani suit, hung loosely off a gaunt frame, and stubble peppered his normally smooth jaw. But I staunchly barricaded any softening behind bitter memories of his callous betrayals. Drawing myself up rigidly, I brushed past him without a word, refusing to indulge this confrontation or be manipulated yet again by his excuses and platitudes. But his hand gently caught my wrist, halting my furious momentum. "Alara, please wait. I know you owe me nothing after how despicably I acted. But we meant too much once for it to end this bitterly without closure. Just hear me out, and then I'll accept whatever choice you make." I wavered. His simple dignity contrasted starkly with prior vigorous denials. Sensing my hesitation, Theo guided us gently to an empty waiting area, his familiar earthy scent briefly distracting before I caught myself leaning closer instinctively. No more damning self-deceptions. I would hear him out, but my erstwhile prince had forever forfeited the privilege of my trust. Settling reluctantly across from him, I crossed my arms and waited. Theo fiddled with his silver wedding band, gathering courage under my expectant stare. When the stretching silence became unbearable, I prompted impatiently, "Well, you insisted on this intrusion, so talk." He raked a hand through prematurely graying hair. "You deserve the full truth about her. About everything." My nails carved crescents into my palms. That wounds were still so raw, even her pronoun felt like lemon juice highlighted my pathetic inability to move on fully. Sensing my lingering fragility, Theo's eyes softened. "Alara, she never mattered. Not like you. It was just a stupid conquest to feel young again with too much booze and flattering attention." I cut him off sharply. "Your asinine midlife crisis doesn't justify the deliberate choosing of infidelity. You squandered precious years we can't recover." My voice broke on the last word. "You're completely right. Nothing forgives what I did." Theo stared beseechingly into my eyes, but hardest to admit has been facing the underlying reason this recklessness felt so compelling. He took a shuddering breath. "I was terrified of truly being there for you emotionally after the last miscarriage. Easier to escape into late nights at bars rather than wrestle with feeling like a failure as your husband." Unwelcome sympathy pricked my conscience, hearing the depth of his private demons before I set my jaw firmly. His weakness didn't exonerate deeply scarring betrayal. Sensing he hadn't earned the right to my absolution yet, Theo leaned forward urgently. "That day you collapsed in the foyer. I ignored 10 panicked messages from Julian to jet off with her instead. What kind of man abandons his wife unconscious and bleeding?" His broad shoulders shook with rare vulnerable emotion. "The affair ended that very night once guilt overruled the thrill of pretended escape. But like a coward, I just doubled down on secrets instead of confessing." Despite myself, hot tears trailed down my face at the excruciating image. Seeing my distress, he cautiously extended a tentative hand. When I didn't pull away, he enveloped my icy fingers in consoling warmth. "Alara Jennings, you have been my steadfast anchor through lost jobs, family deaths, all of it." His thumbs gently traced my knuckles. "I destroyed everything good through my own weakness in failing you, and no words can ever heal that pain." He squeezed my hands softly, meeting my eyes with heartbreaking sincerity. "I just needed you to know your immeasurable worth before our paths diverge for good." I stared sightlessly over his shoulder, struggling desperately to shore up crumbling defenses against this tender onslaught. But Theo misinterpreted my silence and withdrew hastily. "Forgive my selfishness keeping you any longer. I wish you all the joy and peace, going forward, that you deserve." He made to stand before I gave in to the magnetic pull I had resisted for endless lonely weeks, and grabbed his wrist wordlessly. Our joined hands spoke of lingering ghosts not fully exorcised, despite determined intentions to walk away whole and healed. "Come with me to grab lunch before my flight," I whispered hoarsely. We both could use the company. His eyes lit up with notes of irrepressible hope that caught traitorously in my weary heart. We meandered slowly through garishly lit terminals with hands loosely linked, the familiar intimacy both comforting and piercing after so many silent nights, strangling on angry tears into my pillow. As we dwelled in this peaceful eye in the storm of separation, I dared acknowledge how perfectly our hands still fit together, if only for a few stolen moments more. But crossing the bustling departure hall, reality intruded as my terminal flashed insistently on the screen above. I lingered reluctantly, clutching these final grains of before slipped away forever. With strength that surprised us both, I embraced him fiercely, conveying wordlessly echoes of grief over wrecked dreams and forgiveness still under construction. His lips grazed my hair, landing feather-light like a blessing. "Walk forward in hope," Theo whispered. Eyes suspiciously bright, he stepped back and raised a hand in silent farewell. I strode steadily to the boarding gate without glancing backward, but as the plane engines roared to life, I pressed my palm against the window, imagining his steadfast silhouette waiting below until distance rendered us strangers once more. I gazed out the dingy bus window as the California desert peeled back, revealing saguaro-dotted vistas under cerulean skies. The burning Golden State sun was just setting behind craggy red peaks. I smiled softly, feeling possibilities stirring within me, like those hardy wildflowers I spotted blanketed alongside the highway, narrowly avoiding the brown desolation. This faded greyhound was miles removed from the privileged illusion of my former life, when spontaneous weekend getaways meant booking a lavish resort suite on Theo's black card, rather than dozing upright with questionable stains on ripped vinyl seats. Yet I had never felt freer than with the wind whipping through cracked windows as I hugged a worn postcard with a hastily circled apartment listing. The ad I had obsessively memorized was for a cozy one-bedroom casita on the outskirts of Tucson, backing up to saguaro forests and sun-baked trails. Affording the $750 monthly rent would require relying on spousal support payments from Theo for a little while longer until I found reliable work. I knew without asking Marlene was getting by on similar temporary lifeboats, whatever settlements our lawyers had wrangled from the former Jennings empire. Pride would just have to cope with necessities for now. My impulsive liberation from toxic security had to transcend fear-based decision-making. I refused to settle in meaningless jobs just for the paycheck. I craved space to rediscover my passions. As the cramped bus navigated the narrow, dusty streets of downtown Tucson after nightfall, I peered out searching for familiar landmarks from the online listing. My eager gaze soon spotted the carved oak tree dead ahead marking my destination. I quickly tugged my worn duffels down, jostling bleary passengers. Scooping up a yowling Hugo, I murmured excitedly to him as we stepped off onto the cracked sidewalk, breathing in creosote and sage-scented air. The promised carved oak stood proudly between two squat adobe homes, seemingly melded with the desert itself. My new neighbor kept a cozy, handcrafted wind chime dangling from gnarled branches that tinkled cheerfully in the warm breeze. Further down the dusty street, lights still burned cozily in low windows as families finished evening meals, faint laughter, and barked dogs echoing through the sleepy neighborhood. Drawing courage from such warm domesticity, I marched up to the small mustard-yellow duplex tucked privately in back, flowers overflowing from rusted barrels flanking the turquoise door. My new landlady, Sylvia, emerged at the sound of gravel crunching under my feet, her deeply lined and weathered face cracking into a brilliant, welcoming smile. Dried lavender sprigs woven through thin braids spilled across her faded peasant blouse as she drew me into an unexpected embrace, redolent of sweet sage and cornmeal. "Alara, so wonderful you made it safe, dear heart. Don't be shy now. Come in, come in. I have your unit all ready for occupants big and small." Her musical voice held echoes of the multicultural Southwest as she scooped up Hugo and cooed nonsense sounds at him. My anxious shoulders relaxed at her easy affection, and within 15 minutes, all my earthly belongings were tucked cozily into the lovingly decorated one-bedroom overlooking fragrant flowering bushes alive with birds. Sylvia proudly demonstrated the shiny oven and gurgling fridge she had picked up secondhand, especially with me in mind, before stuffing my hands with homemade tamales and departing with another fierce hug. Alone in the tiny haven, emotion swamped me as I sunk down on the quilted sofa, staring sightlessly at azure walls and the vibrant paintings adorning them. After so many years existing elegantly in Marlene's cold shadow, I was finally home, somewhere that felt utterly mine alone, to nurture growth rather than shrink small for approval. I didn't bother fighting grateful tears. Let them flow freely to cleanse old wounds so something fresh and resilient could take root. Even Theo's framed face smiling down from my bedside table no longer constricted my heart as it once had. Simply a bittersweet reminder that seasons change, but the essence of who we are remains if we nurture truth within. Curled under a faded quilt watching the moon rise with Hugo purring softly beside me, I made a silent pledge. Never again would anyone dictate my worth or potential. I was finally choosing to live rather than just survive. To embrace life's messy evolution on my own terms, with arms flung open wide. Tomorrow's unknowns no longer sparked fear, but rather anticipation, blooming brightly like those desert wildflowers daring to blossom against adversity. Tonight, I simply rested in my decision to thrive freely under boundless western skies, ready to greet a new dawn.